Parvati is a Delhi-based author who debuted with a short story collection titled The Dead Camel and Other Stories of Love. She has also written a novel titled Close to Home. Her two books for children are Rattu and Poorie's Adventures in History, 1857, and The Story of Babur. She has also written two historical biographies, Jahangir, an intimate portrait of a great Mughal, and Akbar of Hindustan, Imperfect and Extraordinary, the man behind the myth. The last two books were published by Juggernaut. So thank you, Parvati. Thank you for giving us your time today.
Thank
And
you very,
well,
very much to for having me. It's lovely to be here and to see so many uh, faces and people from all over. I can see different parts of India. It's very nice
yes.
to be here.
So they are all writers and aspiring writers who are working on their first draft. So let's hope that we can help them out and keep them motivated. So for our session today, I would like to start at the beginning of your publishing journey. You were first published in your early 30s, right? So how would you describe your beginning?
I well, I don't know. I don't know if there's one word. Um, I think I always wanted to write. It was only thing that I could do, the only thing that I enjoyed doing. And so from the earliest stage, I would be scribbling in notebooks, diaries, stories. Like every summer holiday from school, college, I would start a novel and then abandon it. And so I always wanted to write and always sort of was scribbling away at something or the other. And at the same time, I also wanted very much to be published. And as I got older and older, I was becoming increasingly sad about not being published. And I used to sort of complain, then moan and groan about it to friends. And at one point, a friend of mine said to me that, supposing a publisher came to you and said, I will publish you tomorrow, what would you have to give them? And that's when I realized that I wouldn't have anything to give them, because I didn't actually have any real solid body of work. Like, I just had scribbles here, scribbles there, one poem here, one half written chapter there. So that, and I think that was for me one of the best sort of, somebody said kick in the butt. That was one of the best sort of kicks in the butt that I ever got, because I started then writing in a kind of, and not everybody agrees with this kind of advice, but for me it was very helpful to write on an everyday kind of basis, to open the computer, to sit in front of it for an hour a day and write, whether it was two lines, whether it was two paragraphs, whether it was two pages. And slowly, actually did go from two lines to two paragraphs to two pages, because in some ways writing is also it's a muscle, right? That you exercise. And so that was sort of one of the things that helped me. The other thing that really helped me was another something I just happened to see by, Ray Bradbury is one of my favorite writers. And you know how on the internet you always have little bits of writing advice floating around, and this was one. And he said that, the advice that he often gives to young writers is to focus on short stories rather than novels. And because everyone wants to write a novel, right? But you can spend a year, 2 years, 3 years writing a novel. At the end of that period, you find that the novel is no good. Then where are you? Whereas with a short story, you write one, you take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, 4 months, but still it's done, right? It's done. Maybe it's good, maybe it's no good. If it's no good, you can still write another. It's not like you've spent 2 years of your life or 3 years of life on this. So that is when I also then at around the same time started writing short stories, and that uh, was again something that allowed me to experiment with different sort of forms, different ways of writing, and to get things done. And the third thing that I think really helped me at that time was that by chance I had I had applied for this Toto funds the arts. Some of you may have heard of TFA. They have this for young writers, and I didn't win it, but I think I was sort of one of the runners up. And Sarita, who runs Sarita Vilani, she runs TFA. She called me. It was very kind of her. She called me and said, "Then you haven't got anything, but I like your story." They're based in Bangalore, and I happened to be moving to Bangalore at the time. So I said, "I'm coming," and she said, "Oh, very nice. Come meet me." So I went to meet her, and she had been wanting to start a sort of a writers group, much like what you guys have. And so she started it, and I joined it there, and I was there in Bangalore for about a year or so. When I came to Delhi, there was another writers group that a friend introduced me to. So for 2.5 years, I belonged to these two writers groups, which again was a great help to me at the time, because when you have other people going through similar problems, and then you're sharing your work with them, getting their feedback in what is called a sort of safe space. That was a very nice uh, encouragement, and sort of gave me momentum, and also actually gave me a publisher, because the I was published my first book by Zuban, and one of the editors of Zuban was also part of the writers group in Delhi, which is how we met. And so yeah, so these were kind of what led to the first book being published.
And now you're 5, 6 books in, right?
Yes,
So you have the benefit of the hindsight. So
yes.
what would you tell your younger self now, the one who was dreaming to get published?
This is a tricky question, because I'll tell you, of course, all of us have, everyone has things that they would like to tell their younger selves. All of us have made all kinds of silly mistakes, things that we should have done, shouldn't have done, wish we had done. But when you're talking specifically in the context of writing and for writers, it becomes tricky, because I think for writers and artists generally, it is your experience that you put into your writing. Like the experiences that you have are what go into making your writing. And I don't mean that you only write about things that you've experienced. I mean, and I don't mean like it could be it could be fiction that you're writing, it could be non-fiction that you're writing. You could be writing a very intimate memoir. You could be writing the history of a like an obscure battle that took place in the 12th century in Mongolia. Of course, you will not have experience of battling in 12th century Mongolia, but you will have experience of fear, or of anger, or of hate, or of uh, victory, the sense of victory. And some of these feelings will be not positive feelings. In fact, they will be negative feelings that perhaps if you were to look back to your own self as yourself, you might think, oh, I wish I had not experienced these things. But when it comes to your writing, these are the things that you will use to bring that writing to life. So in that sense, I mean, I don't mean to say that I did everything right, or I mean, there are many things that I would change. Uh, but I think that when you're talking specifically in terms of writing, those are the things that make you who you are. Those are the things that form your writing. In fact, Martin Amis has a book called Experience. I don't know if some of you may have read it, which is kind of about this only, the kind of experiences that made him a writer. And just as a brief example, I could say, like, uh, let's say my second book after this, the first book was done, and then I thought, okay, now let me see if I can write a novel. And I did, and it took forever. It took 4 years to write this novel, and it's not even a full novel. It's a novella. It's 37,000 words long, so it's very short. It took forever. It took 4 years and 6 drafts. And I suppose I could now, if I were to go back, I would say to myself, that I know the mistake that I was making. It was that I was trying to write a novel like I wrote short stories. In short stories, you can write, you can have a sort of inkling of what you want to write about. You have a moment, you have a feeling, you build your story around that. With a novel, you can't. You need to have a far more detailed idea of where you are, where you're going, who's doing what, why they're doing it, plot, motivation, all of those things you need to know, right? You can't just sit down and start writing and hope that it will magically turn into a novel. I learned this sort of the hard way. But on the other hand, the fact that it took me 4 years to do also was an experience, and it taught me that the other thing that you really need, besides the sort of structure and the plot and all of that in a novel, what you really need is stamina. You cannot uh, give up, and so that I wouldn't have done if I had already known this. So so that's why, I think we know from movies that time traveling is a dangerous thing, and I think particularly so for writers, I would say.
Okay. So, but how did you get into writing historical biographies? And why did you start with Jahangir?
I started. So Jahangir itself, Jahangir was a second Mughal. I think a lot of my writing career, such as it is, has happened the way it's happened because I have basically said yes to other people's good ideas. So I happen to be working in Aisha, Good Earth Aisha, and where we used to do maps and travel guides. And then there was this idea of, why not try to do children's books, and children's books specifically with Indian themes, so Indian history, Indian geography, Indian mythology. And I was an editor there, so actually I was looking for people to write. But and me and my boss were discussing, the what history maybe, and we were talking about the Mughals. And as it happened, she happened to have a copy of the Babur Nama, and she brought it to the office, and she said, "Why don't you, have a look to see what's in it?" And I took it with me. And I remember I was coming back home. I was in the metro. I was standing in that little corner part where you can get a nice backrest so you can read. And I started flipping through it, and I wasn't sure, what I would find. I wasn't expecting anything spectacular. I thought it's going to be sort of dull, or no, I mean, a very sort of cut kind of account of dates, battles, names, that kind of thing. And I started reading right in the first pages. There's this scene. He's talking about his family, his father. His father was called Umar Sheikh. Umar Sheikh was a kind of roly-poly chap and very fond of parties and eating and drinking and talking and laughing and all of that. And Babar says that sometimes, after a party, when he was laughing very loudly, the laces of his tunic would snap open. And this was just such a perfect thing, like for children, like the buttons popping open of this Umar Sheikh. So I thought, let me try, to work on this. So Babur was the first Mughal, but that was a kid's book. And then I was working on another novel, and which I was doing with Juggernaut, and for various reasons it wasn't working out. I went to meet Chiki and Siva Priya, who was my editor there, and we had this meeting, and they was explaining to me like what it was that they thought wasn't right, whatever. And it was okay. So I was leaving, and I was at the door, and Chiki said, I think she had seen Babur, and also in the novel there was one character who was a historian who had given this little talk about the Mughals. She said, "Why don't you do a book on Jahangir, but for adults?" And I don't know why she said Jahangir. I came home. I was obviously a little bit like sad because this novel I'd been working on, I would have to work on again. And I started. I looked up the Jahangir Nama. This is one of the great advantages of writing at this time, that we have the internet. So I found it. I started reading it, and it was just fantastic. I mean, I won't go into it, but I was enjoying it so much. So I said, okay, I'll do it, and so that's how it happened. It was just really all kinds of chance and circumstance.
And obviously, Jahangir was very well received. So, Akbar just followed, or
Jahangir Touchwood was it got a good reception. I loved writing it. I enjoyed myself so much, and I was, like when you've had a nice meal, but you're still a little bit hungry. So I wanted a little bit more of the Mughals. So again, I went back to Juggernaut and I said I'd like to do another. And we had another meeting, Chiki, and then this time it was with Nandini Mehta, who was my editor on Akbar. And and we were discussing where to go, because Jahangir is kind of in the middle, so I could have gone back, I could have gone forward. And they were very keen on Akbar. I wasn't so sure because, Akbar is like a big, big subject. I wanted a little bit more, not like a whole banquet. But again, it was at one point Chiki who said that, if you are going to write about the Mughals, then sooner or later you have to come to Akbar because he is the guy who made the whole dynasty. So I said, okay, let me see. And so that's how sort of
Yeah,
Akbar
I
came about.
mean, yeah, Akbar is the most widely talked about Mughal emperor. It must have put extra pressure on you to write
It
Akbar.
certainly did. It certainly did. It's most talked about now, then, in between, all the time. I mean, there's so much written about him by his contemporaries, by by people later on, colonial historians, national historians, current historians. So there's so much information, so much interpretation, so many people with so many very strong opinions, love him, hate him, about Akbar. And he is himself a very, very, I mean, no matter how much, you try to humor, he's just a very, very impressive man. So you feel like, you feel like sitting up when you're writing about him. You can't be lounging. And I didn't want that. I wanted to be able to write in a sort of familiar, informal way. So it took a lot of look lot more with Jahangir. It was very easy because I could be informal with him immediately. With Akbar, there was a lot more work that had to go into you know breaking that wall and breaking that sort of self consciousness and
Yeah, like for example, like you were saying that it's a lot more work. I personally, whatever I know about Akbar, I think he is a personality with a lot of duality in him. And so I'm wondering, like, how did that affect your research or writing the book to make sure that you represent him properly?
so no, you're absolutely right. He is, and not he. There's a lot of duality in him, and there is a lot of conflicting opinions about him. So you have this you have the Akbar Nama by Abul Fazl, which is the court, the official history of Akbar's reign, and so you can sort of imagine what it's sort of flattering. It doesn't say anything very bad about him. It shows him to be this fabulous, perfect man is how Abul Fazl describes him. Uh, at the same time, at the same, in the very year that Abul Fazl published or brought out the first volume of the Akbarnama, there's a historian called Badauni. Badauni is a translator in Akbar's court. He's highly critical, doesn't approve at all of the things that Akbar is doing. And he starts writing a secret history of Akbar, which is, of course, is not published. It's published after Akbar dies, and then again, then it's banned, and therefore it becomes a super hit. And so you have immediately right there at the beginning, you have these two completely different portraits of Akbar, that to look at. And then, of course, there are others. There's a Jesuit priest, and then later on, other historians who interpret him in all different ways. Uh, so, but that was a challenge in terms of a challenge in terms of absorbing all these different views about him. But in terms of writing about him, it what gave him life, because he was such a complicated man with so many different aspects to his personality and his reign and his ambition and his character, that to unravel all that was part of the joy of writing about Akbar, because he is, we're all complex, all of us have many dualities. He just has 10 times more. uh,
Yeah, so and you had already been reading up on the Mughals when for Jahangir before you started writing about Akbar. But I'm wondering like how long did it take you to research for Akbar? And I'm also very curious like when it is a personality like this who's been widely talked about, there is so much information. How do you verify certain information?
It took much longer with Akbar than with Jahangir. Jahangir took, even to me, it just happened. Like it just happened very easily. I don't know. There were many reasons for it, but so Jahangir took about a year. Akbar took over 3 years. And there were several drafts, and each draft there would be many changes that I would be making and rewriting and all of that. So it took much longer. And as I often say, I don't know, since we are writers here, I think part of the reason that I finished Akbar was because of my editor. I mean, I think writers' best friend is their editor. If you can find a good editor, you should never let go of them, because if it hadn't been for Nandini Mehta, who was my editor on this, I may or may not have actually finished this book. Because she was there, she was interested, she was encouraging, she was reading, she was enjoying it, she was also critical. She was just the perfect sort of uh, perfect combination of things that you need as a writer. And as to a question of verifying, that's a very good question. I think that would be true of any sort of historical person that you would be writing about. Uh, You might even say it's true for any fictional character you're writing about. What is the truth of a person? But in terms of verifying things, so let me give you an example. And that's because there are so many sources of Akbar that in fact helps. So the Akbarnama, Abul Fazl, it paints this portrait of Akbar as uh, sort of semi-divine, right? He's performing miracles. People come to him, they ask for rain, they ask for him to stop rain. There's this fantastic story. He's walking from Agra to Ajmer. Often he used to do this, to the dargah, and he's stopped by a group of people, and they say, this what happened. There was this man, and he was here, and then a tiger came, and tiger was going to eat him up, and this man drew a circle around himself, and then he started praying to Akbar, taking Akbar's name, and then the tiger left. This is kind of miracle. Now, if you're only reading Abul Fazl, you may well think that this man is making it up a little bit. Okay, Akbar may have got delusions of grandeur, and Abul Fazl was just sort of encouraging them, or he really did worship the king. But you also have Banauni, who was very critical, and he was not writing for the court, he was writing secretly for himself. Banauni says that, people used to come for a darshan of Akbar, like so many brute beasts, he calls them. He has very lot of contempt for these people who are, but you see that the seas of people coming, calling out his name, praying to him. These Jesuit priests that I was talking about, again, they are not writing for Akbar. They are writing for a completely different audience. They themselves are also very critical. They don't, they're hoping that Akbar will convert to Christianity, but they have lots of criticisms of him. They tell the story of how Akbar is very stern with the higher nobility in his courts. He wants to keep them in his place, but he's very affable with the people who come. And they talk about, once one of them says a group of women came. They had all prayed to Akbar. Someone had prayed for children. Someone had prayed her child was sick. So they had prayed for him, and now they were coming to give him an offering. Like, you go to a dargah or to a temple to give an offering. They had come like that. They say that women or men, people, would drink the water in which Akbar had washed his feet in order to heal themselves. So you have then, because of these many different sources, you can put together, you can say, okay, maybe Abul Fazl is exaggerating a little bit, but not so much. Clearly, there was this sense of Akbar as more than human, superhuman. And of course, we're talking now about 500 years ago. I mean, now where people, I mean, we living in the 21st century. Even now, I think some people are willing to believe that our current prime minister is sort of divine. So 500 years ago, for people to believe this about Akbar is not, impossible. But so that's how you mix and match. You check from this, you check from that. You remain skeptical. I think always that is trust no one is a good tenet when you're writing non-fiction, particularly history. Sorry, I think your voice, you know,
And you have had to read so much, not just for research, but you are also a bookworm yourself. So, who are some of your favorite historical non-fiction and fiction writers?
I'll tell
Tell
you,
us some must reads.
I will certainly tell you. I can tell you my historical fiction top. I mean, my favorites keep changing. You know, every month, every year. But there's one that has stood the test of time. I love this book. This is called I Claudius by Robert Graves. I don't know if any of you have read it, but I think it's one of the. I've read it so many times, and I'm sure I'll read it again also many times. It's a fabulous history of set in ancient Rome, full of intrigue, soap opera, drama, love betrayal, so many things. It's just beautiful. And then there's a couple of others, more recent Indian non-fiction, fiction, historical fiction that I enjoyed very much. There's Cuckold by Kiran Nagarkar. I like that very much. More recently, there's this book called Tejo Tunga Bhadra. It's by a Kannadiga writer called Vasudhendra. It's translated into English last year or the year before by Penguin. A beautiful story set half in Portugal, half in the Vijayanagar Empire. Very, very, very nicely done. A couple of others I can recommend that are neither fiction nor fiction. So it's a very interesting genre that these people are playing with. There is this book, there's a French, both of these guys are French. So there's a French writer called Patrick Deville who writes what he calls novels without fiction. So these are non-fiction books that are written like novels, like no footnoting, no nothing. But every single thing he says, every single fact, the temperature, the weather, the flowers, the bed cover, everything is verified. And it's called Plague and Cholera. There's one that's been translated. And there's a similar one called by this chap called Laurent Binet, Binet, called HHHH. It is about this Czech conspiracy to kill Heydrich, one of Hitler's, you know, senior people, officials, and it's very good. Again, it's sort of it's non-fiction, but it's written like fiction, and it's a lot of like he keeps sort of like he keeps breaking the fourth wall between him and the audience. It's very interesting in itself, but also in the form that he's using. It's very nice to. It's different and very enjoyable. And finally, I can say two books of non-fiction that I have read recently that I've enjoyed very much was one was Charles Allen, and I'm embarrassed to say I had not read Charles Allen before, but I've read his last book and published posthumously on called the Aryans. Fantastic account of the Aryans and all the history around them. And I have just finished 2 days ago a beautiful book called Circles of Freedom by TCA Raghavan, which is again non-fiction history of the sort of second tier leadership of the freedom movement. So people like Asif Ali, Aruna Asif Ali, Sarojini Naidu, people that you only sort of know the names of, you don't really know uh, the, who they were, what they did. Very, very good, very enjoyable book that I will recommend.
That's quite a few added to my ever-growing TBR. So, people, if you have any questions, start putting them in the comment section, and I'm going to sneak in a quick question. One more question. It's because we don't know much about the women of the Mughal era. All I know is Roshanara and Jahanara. So, I'm wondering if you are going to write one for people like us.
There's already one which I can recommend to you if you haven't read it. Ira Mukhoti's book called Daughters of the Sun. It's a very nice account of various Mughal queens, princesses. So she has done it before.
No, are you going to do one next? Is your next one with
My next
Mughal?
one, I'm really hoping, I don't know, I'm very much hoping to go back to that novel that that I left behind with Jahangir. So my hope is that I will somehow go back to that and finish it.
Any
Uh,
chance of a sneak peek for us? watching
Exactly.
the height.
If the minute there is something to peek at, I will certainly give you a peek. Right now, there is nothing. There's my empty screen.
Okay. So we'll do quick rapid fire sort of questions now, quickly. So whatever comes to your mind first, please go with that. Stick with that. Okay. One common misconception about Akbar and one common misconception about Jahangir.
One common misconception about Akbar is that he was, this kind of very rational, very temperate, very reasonable, great sort of, sort of always in control type of person. Actually, he could be quite out of control. There are things that he does. You have no idea why he's doing them. So he's not he's not this sort of rational thinking through type of. He is that, but he's also very very impulsive and very unpredictable. One common misconception about Jahangir is that he was a complete drunkard. This is very true. He drank a lot, but what people don't realize is how much he was a very functional alcoholic, and that is possibly harder than being a non-alcoholic because he would, he discovered at one point that he was drinking so much his hands would shake. And so the doctor told him he will be dead in 6 months. So he brought down from, I think, 14, 15 cups of double distilled liquor in a day. He brought it down to, I think, 6 or 7. He did this through all kinds of ways. Like, he would dilute his hard liquor with wine in order to make it less potent. And he governed for 22 years, and he governed a fairly prosperous, fairly stable kingdom, uh, keeping his keeping his addictions in check. So that, I think, shows a strength of character that he is not usually given credit for.
Okay. So my next question is you have to choose between Akbar and Jahangir. Who is better as a person?
Yeah, that's very hard. Who is better as a person? I don't know. They're very, very different people. I think if you ask me, if Jahangir is the most sympathetic person. You can sort of feel more. You can feel a sort of you can relate to him more easily because he is the son of an overachieving parent, and as a result, he's never sort of matches up to his father in his own eyes, in the eyes of people around him, in the eyes of his own son sons, in fact. So in that sense, he's the most sympathetic character. But Akbar, for all his, for all that he's a little more scary, is certainly, you know, a man with far greater ambitions, far possibly greater intelligence, empathy, understanding. Like, he is Akbar the Great for a reason.
So I guess I might be able to guess your next answer, but who's
Yeah.
better as a ruler?
Who's better as a ruler? For sure, Akbar. Because he's not just he actually creates the empire. And when you go into it, I mean, there's all the battles and all that, of course. The conquest and the marching armies here, marching armies there. But there's also massive amount of work that has to be done in terms of administration. And this is also something that got him into a lot of trouble. That his own people rebel against him more than once. So he has to first create an empire and then hold it together, which he manages to do over the course of almost 50 years. Whereas Jahangir, he does manage. I mean, 22 years, things are fairly stable, but towards the end of the lane, he loses Kandahar, and then that kind of I don't know if he has necessarily the same. He shares many of his father's traits, but whether he has the same kind of energy and vision, I don't know.
Okay. So your favorite format to write short stories or novels?
Ah, I think I think the short stories are very enjoyable for me to write. Novels are the bigger challenge. I think I was not entirely satisfied with the novel that I did write, which is why I have been very keen to write another one.
Okay, so if you had to live as one of these following persons, which person would you choose? Genghis Khan, Aurangzeb, Attila the Hun.
Oh my goodness. Genghis
Quickly,
Khan.
you have to.
Genghis Khan. I was in Uzbekistan actually 2 months ago, which was entirely flattened by Genghis Khan, so they have no happy memories of him. But I was quite fascinated because this man was like,
Okay.
I don't know what he was.
And who, according to you, is the scariest villain in our history?
The scariest villain in our history, that we don't have too many villains in our history. There's this one guy who always gives me the creeps. I'm forgetting his name. You've read about the Shah Alam, one of the later Mughals, and then there was this. He was kind of almost kidnapped or held hostage by this other Raja whose name I'm forgetting, who came and then he blinded the king and he made them all sort of. He made the princes all sort of dance for him in the court, and he was not just he tortured them, like there was something sadistic about him. So in that sense, he's quite scary, I suppose. Except that I can't remember his name, so I don't know if he was. Yeah, you're on mute. Sorry, Divya.
Yeah, we'll start taking the questions from the audience. So the first one is more of a comment with, hi, Shraddha says, hi, Parvati. My 8-year-old daughter loves the story of Babur and she's very excited that I'm attending this session with you here. Raising kids away from India, I'm constantly looking for interesting children's book by Indian authors. So thank you for writing this beautifully told and illustrated book.
Thank you. Please say hello to your daughter from me. Tell her I'm very pleased that she's enjoyed it.
Okay, so the next is a question from Sangeeta. How do you take care to steer clear of stereotypes when crafting characters in your books? How do you blend facts and imagination?
I think that is the main, that's the one question that all writers have to answer for themselves, when writing. And I think it would be for fiction and for non-fiction that, fundamentally, how are you honest? Because you have to, and that's one of the things that you realize when you're writing is that you will be read, right? And of course, that's what all writers want, to be read. But at some point, at some level, there is that there's a fear that you have to overcome of being read, because when you will be read, when you write, if you write honestly, you will uh, expose yourself in some ways, your thinking and your how you think, how you feel, and these are not necessarily always comfortable, that you may not be comfortable doing. So one of the things that I think I had to learn as a writer was how to be unself conscious about writing and not worrying too much about what people will think. And as to and this I think applies to stereotypes when you're crafting characters in fiction. So supposing you could have stereotypically good or stereotypically bad characters, in which case you're sort of playing it safe. But when you have characters who are sort of mixed, who are neither good nor bad, good characters who have sort of not so nice traits, then you are yourself sort of showing a moral ambiguity, right? You're revealing that, and that sometimes is not something that people are comfortable doing, because they would like to be seen as themselves good only on the page as the author. So that is something that is hard to overcome, but that needs to be overcome. And in terms of in less sort of abstract terms, when you're writing about fiction, let's say we're talking about the Mughals now. Uh, the one of the stereotypes about the Mughals is that they are cruel, there's bloodshed and brutal battles and this that and massacres and and the fact is, yes, often enough that does happen. This happens, if you're talking about 16th century, 17th century rulers, there will be bloodshed and massacres and sometimes great great cruelty, right? And so you might feel, oh, if I write this, then I will be playing into this idea of, stereotyping people who are already now under attack on all fronts. But in fact, actually, when you are able to say things honestly without and dispassionately, without getting overly excited without necessarily taking sides one way or the other, you can craft more realistic and more honest narrative
Mhm.
in nonfiction.
Okay. So Anna, I'm going to combine two questions from Anna and Mahima here because they are similar. So they are asking, how do you pitch the level of complexity of language when writing for kids? Did you have a target age group in mind when you wrote Babur? And then from Mahima, it's how different and difficult was it to write the story of Babur for children?
It again, that's a great question. I think you know. What happens so when I was writing the story of Babur, uh, it was the first time that I was ever writing for children, and I think in my head I was thinking about 7, 8, 9, 10, like somewhere in that range. I had no particular, I had no, it was not a very very specific, but anyway, because children, as some children at 7 will be reading what other children will only read when they're 12, so you can't really tell in terms, you can't have a fixed range. But it was broadly that young children, not 12 and up like that. And one of the things that I think you realize when you're writing for children, and certainly helps, is to not just write it but to read it aloud. Because these are stories that sometimes children will read for themselves, but also they will be read to, and it's not just the story. It's also the language, the play, the little the rhythm of the words, how they sound. What the sound, it has to sound fun, not just be an enjoyable story, right? And it has to keep moving. So you have to, like, you cannot have a gap in momentum, especially when you're writing with the adults. You can maybe drift off a little bit. They will forgive you if you bore them for a couple of pages, but children will not. They will shut off. So I think that was how I was doing it when I was writing that for both the kids' books. And again, Babur was surprisingly easy to write. Some books are easier than others. I don't know why. Like Jahangir was easy to write, Babur was easy to write, the novella was very hard to write. Um, it was easy to write, I think, and Babur, though immediately you don't think of him as somebody, as a child friendly character, but actually, one, he starts off practically as a kid, because his father dies when he's 11, 12 years old, right? And suddenly becomes king. And uh, this is how your classic children's stories begin, with a child suddenly being thrown center stage and having to make decisions. And this is what happens to him. And then he has this, you know, one of the things about him is this insatiable curiosity and this interest in animals, this interest in plants, all of that. Uh, when you're writing for children, it brings a lot. You can bring a lot of that into it, and the traveling, the discovery, all of that. Uh, so there are a lot of things in his life that work in terms of a children's book. Uh,
So second part of Mahima's question was also about Babur, the book you wrote about Babur for children, but I am breaking it up because I also want to know the same thing about Jahangir and Akbar. So, what was your process like choosing what parts of the Mughal emperor's life to storify and how to mold them?
And how to?
Mold them for children of a certain age group. She asked this
So,
about Babur, but I would like to know about
yeah.
Akbar and Jahangir as well.
Yeah. No, so naturally in the case of Babur, it was it's a children's book, right? So it can't go into all the details of there's a whole lot of things that happen during Babur's life, politics and conquest and this and that, betrayal and love and all of which you can't necessarily go into. So it was more sort of broad strokes, right? So his attempt his father dies, then he wants to become like say for example he wants to become king of Samarkand. That's his main ambition in life, and he tries to conquer Samarkand 3 times, and once he's sort of marginally successful, but and at different periods in his life. So all of those are condensed into one. Like I didn't do all three. So that kind of that kind of thing. In I would not necessarily talk in Babur in for children. Babur has many sort of drinking escapades. I would not necessarily go. I didn't go into that because I didn't think it would be of much interest. Uh, if for adults, I would have in the case of uh, uh, Akbar and Jahangir, I uh, I I I mean again, of course, you can't put every single thing on the page, right? But there you can put much more. I mean, you put in all the major things. I think the way that I did it was to focus on the things that were of interest to me, that because if you are going to be writing a book about whether it's fiction again or non-fiction, I mean for the first reader is yourself. You have to remain interested in it, otherwise who else will be, right? And so if you are forcing yourself somehow, okay, I have to cover every single thing that happened, or have to something, these things, this is supposedly more important, like these are important things, therefore I must talk about them, then you may lose interest yourself. So I would tend to go with the things that caught my eye, that caught my interest. Uh, in terms of molding, I did not like in terms you're asking, like, did you try and present that the character in a certain way, right? And I would say no, I didn't. I deliberately didn't because. When it comes to when it comes to the adult books particularly, I'm not a historian. I mean, I've studied history a long time ago, but I'm not an academic historian, right? So the idea was not that I'm going to uncover some new truth about these people or present them in some new light. The idea was to write about them in a way that was accessible, but also to allow for the fact that there are many different ways of looking at them. So there are different ways of looking at Jahangir, like his own son Khurram is somewhat in a sideways manner critical of him. Thomas Rowe is quite critical of him. In Akbar's case, there are not just those Badauni and the Jesuits, but later on, historians who have written fairly critically of him. So I try to present those things also, because I think that's one of the fun things about history, is that we don't all have to agree. You can have different points of view, different interpretations of historical people without having necessarily to choose one. uh, so eventually I try to present as many different opinions and views, uh, and leave it really to the reader to either decide or not decide. My ideal would be to you don't have to have a decision. You don't have to make a decision about uh, exactly what Akbar was or Jahangir was.
Okay. So next question is from Sushmita, who is a fan. She's already read Jahangir and is currently reading Akbar. So she wants to know what aspects of writing a biography were particularly satisfying and challenging. When you were working on Akbar's biography, you must have looked at Ira's biography. What did you want to do different, and do you think you managed to do that?
Uh, okay, for the first part of your question, let me quote. I was talking about this Patrick DeVille, who's written this Plague and Cholera, who says he writes these novels without fiction. And he's written a whole series of them, and they are all biographies of certain characters that he has picked up, and then he goes deep into the lives and tells the story. And in this particular one, he has this lovely line which I like. He says writing the life of a man, in his case he's writing about a man, writing the life of a man is like playing the violin with the score in front of you. So you have the music written out, right? And you're playing it, but what you can do is how do you play it? How are you going to tell this story? Which actually links to the last question that we were talking about, like how do you choose what to talk about? So I think that is the one of the that was a great thrill for me when I came to this from fiction to come to biography writing or non-fiction of this kind, particularly maybe biography, was that the whole story is there. Like I know like I know they were born, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, all these things, and then this, like everything is there. I have to tell it. My job is to tell it in the most enjoyable and maybe I hopefully thought provoking way possible. So you can choose to focus on just one part of writing when you're writing fiction. And I would say, having after this experience, I would say writing fiction is the harder of the two, because in fiction you have to come up with all of it. You have to write the score and play the violin while you're writing the score, and then change it, and you say, oh, this note isn't working, that isn't working. So it's much more it requires a lot more focus on lots of different things. Whereas with a biography, you can choose to focus on just the telling once you've done the research. Uh, and and the second part of the question was, I'm sorry, what was it?
When you were working on Akbar's biography, you must have looked at Ira's biography.
Ha 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 ha. Yeah, yeah. No, so I didn't. I didn't look at it as I very deliberately. I did get it, but I thought I'm going to read it afterwards, and I still have to, because I think after I wrote Akbar, I'd had enough of Akbar for a while, so I haven't yet read it. So I'm going to one day. I didn't read it because basically because so both of us are at least certainly I don't call myself a historian. I don't think Ida does either. She's not an academic historian. So I knew that we would broadly be looking at the same sources. And broadly, what we would be doing is trying to tell the story in our own ways. So she would be telling it in her way, and I would be telling it in my way. So I, as therefore, I didn't want to, you know, get sort of influenced or start thinking about that, because it was so close. Like I was writing. I think we're writing it more or less at the same time, and hers came out a year or so before mine. So I kept it aside. I didn't read it.
Okay. So Anna wants to know that when researching, do you read a research material end to end or for a specific point you're looking to confirm? And do you write on days you do research or split the days separately?
I split the days, because when I'm doing research, I'm doing research. Like, and it takes I'm just in that. And then, but the thing is to actually stop. The point is if you are splitting it, if you can research and write at the same time, that's great. If you can't, which I can't, then you have to at some point stop researching, because researching can be just this black hole that it can be endless. You can keep reading, keep taking notes, keep marking things in different highlighters and all that with the different sticky notes, and you just get into get sort of obsessed with organizing all your research work. But I keep it separate. And I do. I mean, sometimes I'm just looking for one thing, then maybe I will just read for that one thing. But generally, I have tended to read the whole. Because often enough when you're researching, also it can be essays. So I mean, essay, of course, you read the whole thing, and books also. I feel like unless the book is about something so completely not relevant to me that there's no point, or it's so technical, or it's so this thing. If not, then I would prefer to read the whole thing, because you never know, what context or what. Or sometimes you're looking for something, but you don't know. It might come up somewhere else. If you don't read it, you might miss that bit.
And we'll take our last question. It's Shraddha who wants to know 6 books later. Do you have any tips, tricks, learnings, software, etc., to organize your many notes and
I know I don't have any particular software. I just use the usual. I use Word and PDF and highlighter things and uh, for and sticky notes. Lots of sticky notes. I love sticky notes. Different colors for different themes. Uh, and tips also. I think uh, I think it's I think it's the tips that I was given right at the beginning to keep to write as an exercise. Not, and again, I would say, I came across something the other day where somebody was arguing very strongly against this position, saying that you can't just writing every day is like turning the whole writing process into something very mechanical, and you must actually you must leave room for living and experience. And I think that is also very true. It is true that because it's only from living, from experience, from being in the world, being part of it, that you, as I was saying right at the beginning, you get that that basic soul of your writing, whatever it is that you write about. So that is definitely very important, to leave the field fallow, you know. But that said, I think it's also a muscle. It's also an exercise. It's also a kind of everyday rehearsing, doing, in order to discover what it is that you know you are writing about, how you can, and where the writing itself is taking you. Sometimes uh, that happens. If you leave it for too long, then it tends to dissipate. I'll tell you one. My other tip that I think has helped me a great deal in my life is showing writing to people. Some people don't. Like, I don't know. Some people are very shy about showing their writing. They don't like to. I was never. I used to, any unsuspecting victim that I found, I would, anybody that I like teachers, friends, random people, that if I liked somebody, I would go and give them something I had written. And that was also very nice. It always helped me to have people, even if it is critical feedback. Definitely positive feedback is huge boost, but also critical feedback uh, helps. It helps to show people what you're writing.
Okay, that was amazing. Thank you so much for taking some time and sharing your wisdom with us and
Yeah,
experiences with us.